On this episode, we talk about the church and poverty, and we ask, are the church abandoning the poor?
Welcome to TGI Monday. This week we've had a question sent in via email to tgimondayshow@gmail.com. It's a question that comes from Neil, who says, is the church abandoning the poor? Is the church abandoning the poor? It's interesting, isn't it? We all live and work in Lichfield Diocese, which is a very big diocese geographically and very diverse. There's some real inner city parishes down in West Bromwich and in Stoke, but also some very beautiful, apparently quite wealthy rural parishes. But I guess actually there's poverty across the whole spectrum. It's not just limited to those places that we might think. So I guess, is the church abandoning the poor? What are your experiences in the places where you work? Do you feel there are things that the church is doing really well to help poorer people in the community? Are there things which we could be doing better? I don't know, who wants to start? So,
I think we've had, over the last, say, since the crash really, the church has responded in an amazing way really, in lots of different contexts. And we've seen that locally here. And in a sense, in serving the poor, we are rediscovering what it is to be truly Christian, I think.
Go on.
I think that, and you see that in the survey data. So there's the thing about £3.5 billion worth of capital has been gifted by the churches to the country.
Yeah.
But and that seemed to me a very strange figure. But I thought about what we did locally. Like, we run a food bank, we run a debt centre, we're just starting a job club in a couple of weeks' time here in this church. We're working together more effectively. We're hopefully starting a counselling service. So the list goes on and on and on. That's
amazing. Just explain the point that you said earlier about this is how we're discovering what it means to be truly Christian. What do you see as the link between being Christian and that sort of work that you're doing?
I think it's that Isaiah 53 really, isn't it, to bring good news to the poor. And I think that really, if we're not focusing on the weakest in society and all aspects of poverty, then we're not following what it is to be an active Christian in the world. And it's only by making that visible in the world that we can actually work out our faith. But it's not about what we believe as far as bump. It's how we put what we believe into action. I think that's what we are doing, despite what the papers say.
Why do you think somebody would even raise that question? When you listen to the sort of things Hal's talking about, why would we even raise the question of whether the church might be abandoning the poor?
Well, because church is mixed, as is everything else. Sometimes what is visible is not what's actually happening, and sometimes it is what's actually happening. So I think the question is a helpful one, because actually what you were saying about being a Christian means living a life of service and serving poor people. Jesus he gave his followers a bit of a warning before he headed off. When I was naked, you gave me clothing. When I was sick, you took care of me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And they said, when? And he said, well, every time you have done that for somebody in need, you've done it for me. And then he says, and the same is true in reverse. It's me you're keeping out if you're not if you're not ministering to those people and with those people. So then that's where I am.
There's a real Christian imperative actually to be doing those practical things for whoever needs them.
Yeah,
and I think as well, the other thing is, if you look at the fiver, right, if you ever think what has the church done for the poor, you look at a fiver, you'll see on there Elizabeth Fry. When I was in prison, did you visit me? And that's why we have prison reform. It's because of Elizabeth Fry. And reason that my daughter, who's 7, doesn't work down a mine is because Lord Shaftesbury banned it because he was a Christian person.
Exactly.
And the list goes on and on and on and on. But I think that's been thrown down the memory hole.
Do you know, I didn't even know that, sorry, this is slightly off topic, but William Wilberforce, obviously very famous for his work with slavery, but he also founded the RSPCA. You know, and it's extraordinary actually, that sort of Christian care for others, whoever they are, actually.
And it's really important to see the church is working at both ends of society. So yes, we're out on the street, we are doing CAP centres, we're running food banks, and we're helping just day to day, just Christians helping people around helping their neighbour. But at the same time, you've got Christians who are in politics and Christians who are in the House of Lords and Christians who are in tops of, senior people in business. And they're also working in their ways to sort some of these things out. So a few months ago, I was involved in running a conference called Christianity, Politics, the Poor and the Planet. And there we had a cross-party discussion on the issues of poverty and the amount of agreement, even across party, because we all shared the same Christian values.
Yeah.
So, and all of these men and women were working to challenge the powers that be to actually focus as much as they can on poverty. And it didn't necessarily mean it was all done in one way. It didn't mean that it was all about redistribution or whatever. But what it did mean is that we all called out the things that were actually creating poverty in society and trying to bring solutions to the table that might make things better for people.
Because one of the things that's interesting, I mean, you mentioned Isaiah, Hal, but in Isaiah he talks a lot about justice for the poor. And it's not just about how do I help this one person who's in front of me who's really struggling. It is that. But it's also about how do we create a society where people without wealth and without influence and without representation can be treated fairly.
Have a voice.
Exactly, can have a voice and can be treated fairly and can have access. And I think that was part of the discussion, wasn't it, in General Synod last week?
Yes, it was. It was about who we are representing and who is being ministered to in our churches, and what those sort of systemic problems are. And church can either be part of the problem or part of something countercultural. And the risky bit of that from church as a state church is it is a challenge to be doing both, as you say, because actually it's never a comfortable place. We aren't home. It's always now and not yet.
Yes.
And so being in places that can be a friendly irritant as well as part of the problem, and that challenge to be self-aware on all this stuff, because money is very tempting.
Yes.
And power is very tempting. And I think the warning from Jesus is a helpful one.
But poverty is also really complex as well.
It is.
When I was policing down south, there's a very famous priest called Father Robert Doling, he wrote a very famous book called My 10 Years in the Portsmouth Slum.
Oh, gosh.
And his parish was my policing beat for 7 years. And frankly, it is still a bit of a dump today. Right? But when I then moved to the rural communities further north, I found a different kind of poverty. I found middle class and upper class poverty. And instead of seeing a kind of Dickensian type poverty in front of me, now I was going up to grand houses and I'd walk through the door and it'd be mice infested, it'd be full of domestic violence, full of debt. And the immediate thought was, well, why don't they just sell up because they're asset rich? But actually, when you're talking about people with maybe mental health problems or the elderly, selling your property is a really hard thing to do.
But the other thing with that as well, though, is to do with when I grew up in the most deprived borough in Europe. I was really chuffed about that. Merthyr beat us the following year, so we weren't that bad. And when I moved to Cambridge, we worked in there in the lab. The irony about it all is I was working with people who were infinitely more poor than the people from Aberdeen, because in their wealth and their power, they'd actually lost something which was more wonderful that they had in the valleys.
That's very interesting, isn't it? So I think, it's a really important question. I think we all feel quite strongly, don't we, that as Christians we have a responsibility to the poor in different ways, and that the church is doing a lot to help people with poverty, but actually there's something, isn't there, about different kinds of poverty not always being as visible and not always being as easy to see. And as Christians, we do have a responsibility to those people as well, not just the people on Benefit Street, but also the people, like you say, poor in other ways as well. We need to finish. So do you have something very quickly?
Yeah, I was just saying, working in rural parishes, actually, there's an awful lot of that is invisible. Public transport networks, people who are being really isolated and having a very, a much weaker voice. And that's where the church is just dwindling. So I think that was sort of the premise of the question, really, and it's a good one.
It is a good question, and as a church, we do want to help give those people a voice in whatever way we can. Do let us know what things your church is doing to reach out to poor areas of the community. If you think there are weaknesses, you'd love some ideas, we'd love to hear from you.
On your marks. Or on your angles, I don't know.
Oh dear. That's a blooper right there. That was dreadful. I mean, that was so dreadful, it's embarrassing. Will leave you thinking, please sir, can I have some more?